What happened in the Appalachian Mountains, North Carolina, in regards to flooding is shocking. And to be honest, in this video, we're going to discuss why it shouldn't have ever have happened and why it's so bizarre that it did. Now, the other part of this video is going to be about the ecological effects, the damage to the soil, of course, given my background, the effect on flora, so the natural ecosystem in general, and then we're going to get into agriculture and how it's going to affect you due to North Carolina being the exporter of some very heavy-duty stuff that is either never going to be put back in place and recover, or it's going to take years and years for that to come back. So let's get into it. I'm sitting here editing this and the situation is just getting worse, always evolving. So what is in this video may be completely different tomorrow, literally. But what I do want to know is anyone from the Geek crew, if you are in any of these areas, please let us know in the comments down below if you're okay, if you need anything. My heart goes out to you. So I take this video very seriously. I'm not joking around like I normally do. I just want to give that heads up. But please, Geek crew, if you're from this area, please let me know, and let us know if there's anything we can do for you. If it's just an I love you and we hope things get better, then fine by me. The Geek crew will give it to you. So this Appalachian Mountain situation actually had me in tears on Friday night. I had heard about Hurricane Helene in Florida and the evacuation notices in that area, and I only heard about North Carolina and the Appalachian Mountains once horrific things started happening and it started getting posted to TikTok. And I was in tears because I was watching the first-hand accounts of what these people were going through. I was watching video footage, comparatives of what that landscape looked like before compared to what it looks like now. And as someone who loves soil science, geology, plants, the intensity of what happened is actually quite shocking, and that's what makes me gravitate towards this natural disaster more so than other natural disasters. Now, other natural disasters, whether it's flooding or tsunamis or fires, so long as they're hitting in areas that Mother Nature intended them to hit, I actually, as insensitive as it may sound, am comfortable with that. That makes sense to me. That ecosystem, that landscape, all the plants in that landscape are adapted to that happening. So for example, if you live in a floodplain, there are many plants in that space that will only germinate or take off and thrive after a severe flood. The opposite would be burning. So if something starts on fire, you live in the forest, well, that is a very natural cycle that's kind of just programmed into Mother Nature. And unfortunately, us, our houses, our cities, being in this environment is just, we're paying the nature tax, and it's horrible, and I would never want to be placed in that situation, but it's expected, if you will. Now, what happened in North Carolina is not natural. The fact that it was a hurricane is insane. The fact that it was flooding on the scale that happened is unbelievable. So first off, if you did not know, they had rain prior to the hurricane hitting. The hurricane hit, and then the dams, I think it was 2, maybe 3, something like that, actually burst, and so that is what caused so much damage. So if you combine the fact that this area is not meant to have hurricanes and the dams breaking, it's a very unnatural level of erosion and destruction that, in my opinion, will need to be actively reclaimed. And we'll talk about kind of the stages of reclamation and what it could look like for that space and for those people, pending, I guess, what your government chooses to do. Now, to confirm my thoughts on North Carolina, Appalachian Mountains not flooding and how it's not supposed to flood, I actually looked at a soil map of North Carolina specifically because it seems like that area was hit the hardest. So if we look at the map, you can see how it's kind of divided up into different types of soil textures, as we like to call it. And the soil texture that's predominant, very obviously predominant, in North Carolina Appalachian Mountain area is kind of this sandy soil. So sandy loam, sandy silt, like it's all kind of in and around that family. The reason why the flooding was so horrific was because sandy soils have very low water holding capacities. They can't hold on to much water. You combine that with the fact that the granule size of sand is larger and therefore is more prone to erosion on a mass scale, such as like washing it away. Sand is very prone to being washed away. And it's on the side of a mountain, so you have soil on top of bedrock, and the soil you have is primitive. It's not aged. It's not like a clay or a heavy silt. It is in that sandy realm because it is on its way to becoming finer in size. It literally just took it and ran, and that's why it was so destructive. Now, we obviously know that the soil in that space was not designed for that. If the area was prone to, say, that level of flooding, we would see not a lot of soil to begin with. We would see plants kind of embedded into bedrock like we kind of see in the Rocky Mountains, but what we saw here is soil that now has been developed over thousands of years, just gone in an instant. So this means that that space, wherever that soil ended up, cannot be recovered. That has to go back to something called primary succession, where it has to be rebuilt pending how severe the erosion was and how much soil was moved. And that is square one. Primary succession is square one. The only way to get that back is to actually place soil back into those spots. But the scale in which this happened, I just don't see that happening. Now, for plants, some plants, like I said, are adapted to this. So great example of this is cottonwoods. Cottonwoods are developed to survive and thrive in a floodplain. So cottonwoods need flooding to germinate and to survive because they do very poorly with any level of competition. So when the plain floods, it will kill off existing trees and plants, allowing the cottonwoods to germinate and kind of get a head start above everything else. So that is a tree that's meant for that space. And there are a few that are adapted to flooding. It's not many. The likelihood of just ground foliage coming back quickly is pretty low. The trees themselves, pending that the soil structure was only disturbed to a depth in which didn't really harm the roots in a way, those trees, as long as they are taken out of water and that flooding space within 1 to 2 weeks, they will be fine. If they are underwater for more than 1 to 2 weeks, then we are in trouble, and now we're going to start seeing older, larger trees die back. Okay, so where I kind of, I guess, my expertise is really not expertise, but my brain kind of inches towards is 2 exports: the soybean export and the sweet potato export. Now, sweet potatoes obviously under erosion are going to do very poorly, and soybeans also are going to do poorly. Now, there's 2 things in North Carolina that could be happening in regards to the state of soybean and sweet potato production. First option is that it's still being harvested. This time of year is harvest time. And so depending on how many acres or the farm, all that fun stuff, some of that actually may not be harvested and now is officially damaged and or washed away. It's animal feed at best. And if the other spaces in North Carolina have already been sown for winter, so if you guys did not know, you can winter sow various winter wheat, for example. I'm not sure kind of what the protocol is in North Carolina or what agronomists actually encourage out there, but if those obviously have been planted, that has been damaged as well. Combine that with the fact that the topsoil is missing and all that fun stuff, and it just, you can see truly what happens. So let's talk about soil and exactly what is going on with the soil in the spaces that were flooded. Okay, so these rules apply to anywhere that's flooded. So anywhere actually affected by Hurricane Helene and the water sitting in that space or kind of rushing through that space and removing this topsoil. So that really murky looking water is obviously soil suspended in water. So when this happens, there's a couple things. First off, we end up with less nutrients. The nutrients is leached out of the soil. There are many different nutrients that water can catch on to and just kind of ride off with. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is actually the destruction and the damage of microorganisms. And we're going to talk about how detrimental that is here in a little bit, but think on the scale of nutrient cycling and decomposition. So decomposition takes place when there's microbes. Nitrogen cycling takes place when there's microbes. Carbon cycling takes place with microbes, all of these things. So all of these have been stalled and or stopped entirely. Now, the reason for this is because our redox potential has changed, and that's just a really fancy word for indicating how much oxygen or what kind of environment the space is in for microbes. So somewhere that is very heavily saturated has a low redox potential. It is anaerobic, it has less oxygen, and therefore less viability for roots and root health and microbes and that sort of thing. That is what we can expect in these flooded areas. Now, the microorganisms involved in cycling are obviously harmed. Our level of nutrients is harmed, but there's also the macrofauna, if you will, that has also been damaged, disrupted, or completely taken off the map. So this can include things like centipedes, earthworms, beetles, you name it. That world is just, it's gone. And with this being gone, we obviously have less decomposition, but we also are affected because we don't have the beneficial insects that actually go in and take out the bad insects. And so we can end up with more disease and more insect damage to crops in the future because we've reduced and destroyed the beneficial bugs in the space. So for example, if ladybugs are very prevalent in North Carolina and they take care of a lot of thrips on, the mustard crops in the space, the destruction of that ladybug habitat is going to result in likely more thrips in that area. Now, of course, the bad guys are also taken out, but the problem is that they are usually a little bit more resilient, and so because of that, we tend to see not great things. So now the question becomes, how long is it going to take North Carolina, the Appalachian Mountains, to recover from an ecological standpoint, not from a socioeconomic standpoint? How long is it going to take to recover and kind of go back to its normal ways? When can it be home for Bigfoot again? And it kind of depends. So if we ended up with mass removal of topsoil and we are back at primary succession, meaning exposed bedrock, we're talking it's not recoverable in our lifetime. If it is a space where soil has been moved, but there's still some depth or context to it, it's just been sifted, I guess, in a way, we have to wait for the water to recede and for microbes to be brought back into the environment. This can take a few weeks, few months, few years. It depends on the microbe, it depends on the space, and there's ways we can increase this or speed this up. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but regardless, if we were just to let things go on their own, it takes time. And again, there's no set level of time. We can't say, a month from now everything's going to be back to normal. We can't say that. What I will say is that because we've essentially tilled the soil now, the environment does have to go through the process of reestablishing roots, and those roots establishing soil aggregation, and you can see kind of how it trickles onward from there. Now, when it comes to ecological bring back, there are 4 types. There's passive restoration, which essentially means you're kind of letting the space recover on its own, and the instance when you would do this would be like forest fires, for example. We oftentimes will do a passive restoration of the space. And that is because the area is naturally meant to do whatever natural disaster happened and therefore is able to recover easily. The other version is active restoration. So we oftentimes see this in mudslides or in heavily disruptive situations. And naturally speaking, I don't know what your government is doing in the US, but what happened there usually will be actively restored. It just may not be because of the sheer volume of what happened. It just might not be possible to actively restore. So active restoration, it can look like a whole bunch of different things. So it could look like bringing soil in and then securing that soil with, actually they have like these bag type things. You've probably seen them on ditches and highways and that sort of thing. That's to reduce soil erosion. And then they probably will plant like a cover crop on top of that to again establish the soil. So that's kind of what active restoration looks like. They'll usually put nitrogen into the soil. So they'll actually put physical nitrogen fertilizer in this space because that increases microbes like lickety split and is also beneficial to getting, you know, things growing and moving and that sort of thing. Another part of active restoration is actually utilizing plants. So they will use seeds and even saplings from greenhouses and spaces that are very natural to the ecosystem in the Appalachian Mountains, reseed the area. And of course, this is going to take time. It can take, 50 years for a tree to become a tree, but it can recover, and our kids will see it fully recover, if you will. Now there's rehabilitation. So rehabilitation is kind of, I guess you could say it's a mix between passive and active. So there's some intervention in spaces where it's needed, but there's no intervention in other spaces because we just expect it to naturally kind of go in the right direction. So you could say like the establishment of soil, putting soil back in spots where the soil was removed, that could be considered a version of rehabilitation. Now, the last one is full-blown reclamation. And full-blown reclamation we see, in like mine sites, in the oil sands, that sort of thing. And the goal there is to put a heck of a lot of money into actually reestablishing the landscape. So the topography is reestablished, the soils are reestablished, the plants are reestablished in all different shapes and sizes, and then it is actively cared for a period of time. You will continually have ecologists and folks out there monitoring its success and then actually intervening when necessary, when things are taking a turn for the worse, say some sort of pest rolls through the area or there's too much weed competition. They'll spray Roundup, whatever the case is, whether you agree with it or not. That's just kind of what they will do. So that is what active reclamation looks like. I can't say what's going to happen to North Carolina. I don't know what's going to happen to the Appalachian Mountains. I can't even begin to fathom what that will even look like. I have heard reports of 5 to 10 feet of topsoil being removed, which is major. That is major. That is something, to put that into perspective, that is something that you see geologically for thousands of years. If we go up in a spacraft, 100 years from now, 150, 1,000 years from now, and you look down, you very well could identify a mass flood event in that area. That's how severe it is. It is something that I'd like to say only happens once in a lifetime, but with how crazy the weather is lately, I don't actually know if it's going to be once in a lifetime, but horrible. I did put a donation thing down below. I don't know what the US uses for donations, but I do know that Canada uses Red Cross and most countries use Red Cross, and Red Cross had an option to donate to them. So I'm going to put that link down below. I don't manage any of the money. It just goes direct to them. And it's just, I just can't even begin to fathom what it'll look like. I think step one absolutely is taking care of the people and the animals, the pets, all that sort of stuff. So in order for that to happen, I'm sure they need money. 'Cause from what it sounds like, they're even having a hard time getting to a lot of these people. It's very, very messed up situation. So thanks for watching. I will talk to you guys next time. Sorry it's such a sad video. My goodness, Kane. Oh my God. Pain in my ass.